Hello. All right, got the audio working. Sorry, I forgot to turn that on before starting the stream. Thank you so much for joining today. Today we're gonna react to a interview between Tucker Carlson and Ray Dalio. I respect Ray Dalio. He's a very smart and accomplished man. He is obviously very intelligent and very capable. However, I wanted to go with a provocative title, and I'm not just putting this as clickbait. I actually genuinely think that he is overrated. I have consumed a lot of things that he's said. I've even read part of his book. I didn't finish it, partly because I was not super impressed by it. And like ultimately, I typically despite the fact that like a lot of people think that he is saying a lot of insightful things, my personal opinion is that he gets a lot of things wrong, and he just I just feel the need to tear apart the things that he says. So without further ado, let's get into it, and maybe I'll just give you a little bit of background. Who is Ray Dalio? Ray Dalio is the founder of Bridgewater Associates, which is a major hedge fund, very successful. He's one of the most successful investors of his generation, and he is now kind of retired, and he does a lot of like thinking about where the world is headed, and he thinks about like what is the impact of debt on the economy, and you know, like what is going to happen in our society, and what is the balance between US and China relations. And so he talks about a lot of these things. So I disagree with a lot of his perspectives, including the fact that he thinks that China is absolutely destroying the United States and is like beating us in every single way. I just fundamentally disagree with that. And you know, he's done like a lot of things, like release an app. He wrote this book called Principles, and he wrote several other books, but his biggest book is called Principles. I read part of it. It was interesting. It seemed good, but he made this app for like managing your principles. I don't think that really was successful. You know, he kind of ventured into the self-help world, and I'm not sure that he really helped many people. I don't know. But anyway, let's just listen to his ideas, and I want to pick apart the things that he says. So he is being interviewed by Tucker Carlson. Let's get watching. And oh, just so you know, on my channel, I do lots of reactions to videos in tech and politics and stuff like that. And I have a playlist here called Sources. It's on my channel. And so if you subscribe, you can keep up with all my latest videos. Please like this video if you like it. Leave a comment. I read the comments if you disagree with me. I have this playlist called Sources on my channel, so you'll be able to find all the videos that I react to there. All right, let's get watching. Let's start over. Oh, wait, I don't think, for some reason, the audio, I don't think you're hearing this. My apologies.
Is that there are irreconcilable differences.
Okay, I'm going to start this over. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Okay, the audio should be working now, though.
So I've heard you say that the United States is in a civil war, and I think most Americans don't perceive that. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by a civil war, I should say a type of civil war, right? And what I mean is that there are irreconcilable differences that each side is willing to fight for in order to get the outcomes that they want. And that in that environment, the issues of how does the legal system work, is that going to stand in the way of that fight? Or is there going to be a fight that will make the cause more important than anything? So That's the type of situation that we're in. And those gaps, we understand there's wealth and values gaps that are entering into this. This is, we've seen this through history. So where that goes is a different question, but we are in that type of civil war, are we not?
Clearly we are. Clearly we are. How are they?
I disagree with that, but let's keep listening to them develop these points before I do any sort of refutations. I mean, we're clearly not in a civil war. Yes, there's conflict, but to say that that's like some sort of metaphorical civil war is kind of crazy. Like civil war is when things get to the tipping point. It's not when there's just disagreement inside the system. That I mean, at that point, the term civil war kind of ceases to have any meaning, unless you're just like comically aligned, just the whole country, like, okay, let's all do the same thing, let's all agree, unless like that's your burden for not being in civil war. Look, if this is civil war, then give me civil war. This is fine.
Resolved. I mean, clearly they can be resolved through violence, but what are the other ways you resolve
through
the
civil
kind of
war,
conflict
you
we
mean?
have?
Normally, they're resolved through conflict. Because you get
What's
to the point
conflict?
where both
Is he
sides
saying violence or is he saying conflict? I mean, that's whatever. Let's keep listening. I won't nitpick every single thing he says.
can't reach agreements. Both sides don't even want to talk. Both sides don't want to respect the rule of the law. So when we're dealing with things like sanctuary city issues and we're dealing with enforceability, who has the enforceability? Okay, and you almost have to play out. Okay, enforceability means police forces and such things.
Right.
Who has
People with guns, yeah.
people, right? People with guns and causes that just because the legal thing says they shouldn't do that, that's not going to stand in the way. We have that kind of a situation. So we are probably past the point of being able to resolve that by compromise and empathy and all of that. So normally it goes that way. I mean, the only thing that can be done is to have the fear of that create a necessity for having another path. Like we were talking about the debt situation.
Yes.
So can there be a fiscal commission that gets?
Hold on. Okay, so what exactly is he saying? He's saying that sanctuary cities are such a dividing and essential issue that we need to have fear of a violent conflict in order to resolve this. I mean, I don't think that that's true. I don't think most people care that much about sanctuary cities, and I don't think that this is an unsolvable issue just through conversation. It's like there are questions of enforceability. There always have been questions of enforceability throughout this country's history. There is a tension between the states, each individual state and the federal government. This has been there since the founding. This has been an essential question that we've asked. There's always been back and forth and ebbs and flows in the way, like who has jurisdiction. And over time, the federal government has gained a lot of authority over the states. But again, this doesn't seem like anything new. I don't see how this is like some unprecedented time of conflict. This is business as usual. I don't see how this is civil war. I don't see how this is a particularly interesting time. Let's keep listening.
Together and then achieves those things or not. I think it's unlikely. I think we're going to more fragmentation. States, there are some states and other states.
I guess the point I want to get across is just because there are factions in a political system and there's power centers and there's different geographies that have different interests, all of these things do not mean that you don't have some sort of federal or some sort of like federation of parties that cooperate in a cohesive manner. Like the European Union, each country in there is its own sovereign nation, and there's still a governing body that you can say it doesn't function well or it does function well, but it still does function. And to say that, for example, oh, because Hungary and France fall on a different end of the spectrum, therefore the whole thing is falling apart. Therefore, it's a civil war. Or because the UK wanted to exit, therefore the EU is in civil war. That's just not true. It's just not the best way of thinking about it. Yes, there are some things that are relegated to the local municipalities, and some things are in the whole EU region. And there's different laws that are made at different levels, and there's jurisdictional conflicts. This doesn't mean that we don't have a coherent system.
You're going to see more fragmentation. And so, but, it's like this dynamic through history. This isn't the first time this happened. This happens repeatedly through history. And usually, it runs its course.
I like these types of thought experiments. I like the kind of thing that he's saying, but it's just kind of hyperbolic. And I don't think it does him any favors to be hyperbolic. And then, as I think you'll see, there's kind of just a lack of good suggestions in this conversation.
So the way our leaders in the United States have dealt with it over the past 30 years has just been to ignore it completely, just ignore it.
Well, there's a cycle, The cycle was, let's say, I don't know, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, and they get together and they were operating in a certain way. And the manifestations of the circumstances, the manifestations of debt or wealth gap or values gaps were not as great. So you didn't, over that 30-year period, have as much polarity in many different ways. So now you've gone to greater polarity. If you watch statistics, everything I do comes from measuring things. So I look at statistics. The gap in measuring conservative or liberal votes in the House and the Senate is the greatest gap since 1900. And the voting across party lines is the least since 1900. So you see this gap. You see it in the elections, right? The green and red. So the blue and red. So
okay, hold on a sec. Okay. So this is one of the problems with looking at history and trying to find patterns, especially because it's hard to know what you should be mapping the current day to. And this is something, especially people in finance, they do this horribly all the time. So they look at all of financial history. We analyze the entire stock market history in the United States, and this is what we came to. Or they go back further in time. And if you go back further in time, in finance especially, you end up basically dealing with markets that are not really like our current markets. These are very old markets with very different dynamics, very different situations. There's lessons to be learned there, but there's less lessons than you could in the modern day. But the problem with going back, let's say 100 years, is that you end up facing some anomalies. So what happened in the US in particular was there were 2 world wars, and the US went through a radical transformation in the structure of its economy. I mean, Europe too, but I'm more versed in the United States. And essentially, we in the early 1900s, was it 1913 or something? We created the Federal Reserve. We created the income tax. We created the UN in I don't know. Is it 1920-ish, around there, give or take 5 years, maybe earlier than that. We created the UN. So there's international governance, and then basically we had 2 world wars, which destroyed Europe, which was basically the largest industrial base at that time outside of the United States, but it got destroyed. So now the US was dominant. the U.S. then went and, like developed the biggest military, got a huge advantage, and then the Soviet Union went around in Eurasia and conquered a lot of places, dragged those places down, and there was just long protracted war, and ultimately the U.S. beat the Soviet Union. And you have to keep in mind also, this was like a giant freaking war. In like World War II was just, I mean, both World War I and World War II were giant. After World War I, there was the Great Depression, and the Great Depression led to a lot of new government programs that were created that didn't exist before. And then in World War II, like basically all the young people went and fought or were aiding in some way in the war effort, and then everyone came home at the same time, and they had a bunch of babies, and that is when normalcy started. There was the Cold War, but we won that after a few decades. And so this was a very weird period. And at the same time, we had technology being completely revolutionized. Like we had the computers invented, like the computer revolution, the internet revolution, the .com, everything. Now we have AI, like fast forwarding more decades, right? And there's been a massive amount of change, and the nature of financial markets has changed immensely, even since like Ray Dalio retired. I mean, maybe not that much since then, but he has overseen this great transformation in the financial sector. And so when you look at like a lot of these constructs, like these financial constructs that we have today and these lessons that we have learned in the past 100 years, we have to realize this past 100 years is very weird. We basically just set up this system around 100 years ago, this monetary system, the stock market in the way that we currently know it, the derivatives markets, all these things that we do, these advanced financial instruments that we are using, we're not doing this type of stuff before this past century at scale. And so we don't really know how this ends up. For example, this is the example I like to use. Index funds. Everyone says, oh, you just put your money in an index fund. It always goes up. We looked at all the data in the stock market, and this will always go up. It's just you don't want someone to manage it because they're going to spend too much on fees. You should just buy the index, and that's the best way of getting the best returns. That has historically been good advice. However, there are a lot of reasons to believe that is not going to hold up indefinitely. And one of the reasons is if too many people do it, then there's not enough people actually trying to find value in the stock market, and you don't have good price discovery. And so everything is mispriced, and this would lead to unsustainable activity in the economy. And ultimately, there's going to be a collapse if that occurs. And so you can't take that lesson away from the past 100 years. And the other thing that I'll say is that so there's Ray Dalio has this all-weather portfolio that he has, and it is kind of like the idea of putting money in an index fund. It's like this investment strategy that you could have for you can just always use this one strategy. It's very simple. You put like some money in cash and some money in gold and some money in bonds and some money in stocks, something along those lines. And this is his recommendation. Again, he did back test this, and it does work well, but the people have pointed out a lot of problems with this portfolio if you were to do it indefinitely. And we won't go into that, but I see him making these mistakes. And so now let's talk about the example that he's actually specifically referring to here. What is he talking about? He's saying that this is the greatest amount of disagreement since the year 1900. Okay, let's think about this. First of all, when was the Civil War? I don't even have that date memorized, but I'll tell you, it was not 1900. It was before that. Okay, so I don't know if what is the levels of agreement and disagreement were before that. I haven't looked at this data, but we're not going back that far. So now, what happened after 1900? Okay, let's think about it. We had a world war. We had a stock market boom. We had a stock market collapse. We had another world war. Then we all came back from the war and we just kept winning. And we had existential threats, and we had like these grand unifying events. And we basically had a technological revolution that made everything change at a very rapid pace and accumulated a lot of power to the institutions in America. So I would expect that basically when these US institutions keep winning and there's all of these unifying events, either a common enemy or a common disaster or very good times where everyone's winning, that's when you would expect a lot of unity. So, like, just on the face of it, I do think I would just assume something along those lines. Like, I mean, I don't think there was a lot of dissent in 1990, or I don't think there was a lot of dissent in 1970. Like, you wouldn't think that comparatively that would be the time where there's the most dissent internally in U.S. politics. 1900 does sound about right, because a bunch of shit happened in that next century that was about to occur. You would think people would be slightly more united under those circumstances, and that's not necessarily a good thing, by the way. Being united, sometimes contention and disagreement is a good thing. You can push each other to be better, but so I don't think that that's a meaningful metric, and let me tell you why I think this is happening now. It's because we have these powerful institutions that have been built up and have succeeded in the past century. And now they're not keeping up. Now the world is changing, and these institutions are not changing with the world. They became the winners, they became king of the hill, and so they haven't had those pressures to actually continue to deserve their place at the head of the table, so to speak. Like, for example, the Washington institutions have done a very bad job of having a good public image in the world where the internet exists. And so the reason is because they've had these very sophisticated ways of maintaining their image. They've had journalists, they've had TV, and all of these people were on the payroll of getting money and funneled money through shell corporations to finance these media projects that would subsidize the thought leaders in these key industries in Los Angeles and New York. Like, there was all these elaborate schemes that worked really well to control public opinion and manipulate public opinion. But in the age of the internet, that doesn't work, because the truth gets out. And when you're lying, it looks really bad. And so, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that the government needs to get with the times and have better disinformation campaigns that astroturfs the internet in a better way than they were previously. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that strategy of lying and running disinformation campaigns in general, that type of PR, is not a winning strategy anymore. Information now flows too freely. It will not work. You have to just simply side with the truth. That's the only way. So if institutions had proven their trustworthiness, and then the internet would have posed no threat to their authority. And so what we see is the death throes of a regime that had a very firm grip on power and used that to manipulate the messaging that was going out about what was happening in the world to the population. And now their grip is loosening because they're not in touch with reality. They don't realize the degree to which people can dissent on the internet. And this is also not something that they can really pull back. And you can't turn off the internet. It's too important. Too much money is being made on the internet. Too many people's lives depend on the internet. It is a cornerstone of our society at this point. So they're going to try, but that's just only going to alienate them further, because they want to, for example, fight disinformation. So they crack down on the internet. Now they start ruining the internet. Now they start ruining people's livelihoods. Now they start hurting people inadvertently through these actions. And as you can see, this just further degrades their credibility, because then people say, why was the internet cracked down upon? Because these guys told us to. And then you're like, well, these guys are liars, and now they're cracking down on the internet. We hate them. That's literally what's happening right now. That's literally what is happening right now. Like all this stuff with the U.S. aid, Elon went in there and took out U.S. aid. That was actually what the internet censorship campaign in the government ran through U.S. aid. U.S. aid played an integral role in policing the internet. And why? Because the word was getting out of the bad things that the government was doing. So the government tried to censor the internet by imposing a variety of different things on it through U.S. aid and through other means. And now now people are, first of all, seeing this type of censorship that was government sponsored. They're pissed off about it. They see the negative ramifications that, like, what has brought us, it has created really bad results. So people are upset about that. And they're still upset about all the things the government lied about that they learned about online. So you can't fight this. You got to just change. You got to just be better. The institutions in the United States have to be better. And I'm going to also completely disagree with Ray Dalio's positioning of left versus right. Maybe I should get into this a little bit more later after he says more stuff. I tend to do this. I tend to go on these long rants before people have even really fully voiced their opinion. But still, I will say, like, this is not left versus right. This is people with an old media diet versus a new media diet. This is informed people versus people who are believing the propaganda. And unfortunately, the people in power are the ones believing the propaganda. They're believing their own propaganda. But yet they're in power still. So it's a bit of a struggle to actually change the course, because you kind of need to get the keys out of their hands, so to speak. So we'll dive more into that. But yeah, he's saying, oh, there's no votes across party lines. I think that's not as significant. That doesn't really give us much insight into things. But let's keep listening.
It's not just an evolutionary, it's where we are, where we have gotten to. That is the irreconcilable questions. Does the Supreme Court, we thought about the Supreme Court differently not long ago, right? The Supreme Court was the Supreme Court. And so now it's different.
I don't think that's true. So what accounts, I mean, there are a million ways to measure this, and all of them.
Do you agree?
Well, of course I agree. Of course I agree. And I agree with you that every measurement shows the same result, which is the country is polarized.
So we know where we are.
But completely, and we're not sure how it's resolved, but I think it's also worth pausing to ask what happened.
Sorry, I gotta just keep talking here. So, okay. The Supreme Court is a great example. So when you think about these checks and balances in the government, there is a lot of stuff there that is unlitigated. There's a lot of behavior that's undefined in those systems. So if we were like programming this as computer programmers, this would be raising a lot of red flags because there's no spec for how to handle various types of conflict. There is this general system with checks and balances between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. That's how the US government works. And the Constitution lays out a general blueprint for how these independent branches of government interact. And there is a lot that's said there. And then there's a lot of precedent to establish how we handle various things. But not everything is covered in the Constitution, and not everything has been dealt with in the past. And even if something has been dealt with in the past, just because it was resolved in a certain way in the past, it's certainly worth taking that into account. But that's not, for example, as binding as something that's explicitly enumerated in the Constitution. It's just not. Just because someone had decided something at one point in the past, that's the way we should interpret it. You can't say that that's true. It's definitely worth taking into consideration how things have been done in the past, but it's not. It's a weaker standard for basically consensus across these three branches. So when you have a disagreement across these branches, it's actually a bit of a free-for-all. There's a bit of anarchy there. It's inherent and it's unavoidable. these things are just, they are up for interpretation, and there are power dynamics, and there's going to be a power struggle. And that is just simply the reality. It always has been, it always will be in such a system as we have today. There will always be these types of power struggles. So let's not get, because there's tension between the branches of government, that does not, like, just because nobody is at one moment saying that, oh, the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to do this, or we're not going to listen to this court, or whatever people are saying, or we should change the way the Supreme Court is structured. Just because nobody's saying that at one moment, it doesn't mean that that tension is not there. It just means that it's not being vocalized at that moment. And I just think that Ray Dalio was basically in this bubble that everyone else was in as well, especially as a very successful individual, where everyone was, overall, they were really happy with the system. The system has delivered great results. And so there's no complaint. People were just like, yeah, these are good institutions. They're still good institutions. I still think they are. But unfortunately, a lot of them have been led astray. And what they've done is they've just kind of gotten away with a lot. So they've just lowered their standards, and they've gotten complacent, and they got lazy. And now we're just uncovering some of the BS that they're doing. And it's not okay. And we just need to fix that. And I don't think it's deeper than that. I really don't.
The change that led to the polarization that was unimaginable even 35 years ago.
The change was in a combination of the system working well for the majority of the people, and which has to do with the majority of the people not being productive. You have productivity equals income.
Right.
Okay. So now if you take education and you take measures of how productive or how well trained you're going to be, you see, and therefore also income, your productivity, you see by all of these measures, great gaps that exist. So by way of example, is unicorns and the changes that we're seeing, fabulous changes in what we're seeing in technologies.
Yes.
But it really comes down to, if you take the number of people who have been making those changes and having unicorns in this wonderful world, they go to the best universities and they make these wonderful things happen. That's about 3 million people in a country of a little over 330 million people. And if you take the average, 60% of Americans have below a sixth grade reading level.
Okay. Wait,
60% of Americans.
Okay. So several things. First of all, if you know about power law distributions, you know that that is totally fine. And this is how any sort of stochastic mechanism works. It's not that everyone gets the average result. It's not that it's like, okay, so our GDP per capita is whatever, $60,000. I don't even know what it is. But okay, so everyone has $60,000. That's not how it works. It's not how it should work. The thing is people have different visions. They have there are only a certain number of tech companies that need to be built. There's other types of companies too, but let's focus on tech. So people that want to work in the tech sector, they have an idea, they go out and they work on it. That idea might not work. And there's actually a very low chance that it works. And so what you do though, is you get a lot of people to try. And out of those attempts, someone is going to hit gold. And really the key is finding exactly what to do that adds value to people. And you can't know what that is before you try. You can speculate, you can have an idea, but that is going to be very low resolution. And you're not going to really know how to add value to the most people. You could try all your life and you could never figure it out. And it just has to be, there's an element of randomness in this equation. That you have to start in the right place, you have to get to the right place. And of course, if you're smart and hardworking, it helps you. But just by having many people try something, that's how we get results. By having lots of shots on goal. And then some of these shots work out. And when they win big. And this is super cool. So now what happens is there are like a lot of people try to start companies, only some of them succeed. And then those that succeed really big, and they provide a lot of value throughout the economy, and this helps everyone else. So we get way more growth by having this sort of system where we give lots of people a chance to take a shot at building things. But you can't just do that in isolation too, right? There's different risk profiles to different things. It's a lot less risky to build, for example, some other type of business, like a contracting business where you're pairing countertops or something, than it is to start a SaaS tech company. You have like definitely a higher upside with the SaaS, but it's most likely most of them fail. Whereas, like you can basically put in some hard work yourself, repair people's countertops, and then maybe hire another person. The risk isn't as intense. And then there's people who don't have the temperament for being an entrepreneur, and they can either work for an early stage startup or they can work for a countertop company, and they don't have to do that extra work of actually starting the business, but they can still benefit from it. All that is to say that I know that Ray Dalio knows this, but I don't see, like, you would expect in any system there to be some big winners that win big, and this actually ends up, in a sense, subsidizing everyone else. That is just the right way of looking at it. I'm sorry. I guess if anyone in the chat doesn't agree with me, let me know. I'll dive more into this. But the other thing he's saying is reading level. And reading level is not a good reading level is not a good proxy for anything. Because first of all, I would like to look at the whole chart and the whole trend, but people don't read that much. You don't need to read that much to be productive in society. Reading, I would like to know about like conversational capability, IQ. Like there are, we can look at different performance metrics, but reading, 6th grade reading level is fine. That's fine. I'm happy to give a 6th grader or a 5th grader something to read and have them tell me what it means. Like they know it. They're good enough. Like that's fine. And people don't need to read books these days. They watch a lot of YouTube and TikTok, and I just was using ChatGPT the other day, and I have the Pro version, and I used O1 Pro with deep research. It wrote this super long response. I didn't read all that. It was way too much to read. I barely can read. I can't concentrate on reading a long block of text. So that's not even a really irrelevant metric. I would not go off of that. If that's just some alarming rate that makes him worried, it doesn't make me worried. I'd have to see the totality of the evidence. I'm not saying I 100% know that everyone is super productive and capable in this economy. I'm sure that there's a lot of people who aren't, but reading comprehension is a very bad way of measuring that in the modern day.
So when we deal with education, you have to make that population productive, and through productivity, they become educated and they become productive. They earn money, and you have a better society. So a number of things changed that. It was the combination of globalization and technology. Think about, I remember, and you probably remember, what the middle class working on an assembly line at an auto plant was like, and how manufacturing occurred.
Yes.
Okay. A combination of foreign producers and automation changed all that.
Of course.
So that produces a larger wealth gap. And then with that wealth gap, we also have very large values gaps.
But it's driven by the...
Okay. I'm not even going to debate this, because this is something that lots of people have debated, and it's, there's no point of going into the weeds on this, but I just don't, like, sorry, no, people should not be building cars. That's not a good job. It shouldn't, like, this should be automated. I I get it. I want people to live a good life. I don't want someone to be in a bad situation where they're out of work, they're desperate, there's no options. Like, this is bad. I really, I feel for people, but like, let's just take a step back for a second. Manufacturing, low level manufacturing jobs that can be automated should be automated. Why are we having people do things we don't need them to do? It doesn't make sense. Like, think about the unions in the ports. Like, these people, I remember they were like, we're going to shut down the whole economy. You need us to run the ports. It's like, no, we really don't need you to run the ports. In fact, you make the ports worse. And you're just leveraging the fact that it's difficult to transition to automation. And you're leveraging that so that you get more money at everyone else's expense. We don't need you in the long term to do that. And this is not personal. It's not personal. You are awesome. But we don't actually literally need you to do this job. In fact, it's more expensive and it ends up not working out as well when you do this job instead of robots. So I want to be clear that I don't want to put anyone in a bad situation. I think we need to think long and hard about how do you take care of people if they need it. I don't know that they need it. I don't know that they can't fill another job in the economy just as well. I don't know that to be the case. I think people who work in car factories and people that work in the docks and the ports of this country, all these people, I think they may actually be able to find great jobs without any government assistance if we were to completely automate these processes. I think that they could, but I don't know that to be the case. If they couldn't, I would want them to be taken care of in some way. But I do think that they could, because now we have super cheap cars. Now we have super cheap goods. Everything being shipped into the country is even cheaper. Like, this is, I mean, I don't need to, again, I don't want to go into this whole debate about why free trade is good and why automation is good. It just is. There's this talk of a wealth gap. Let's let them talk a little bit more about a wealth gap. They're saying there's a wealth gap and a values gap. The values gap would be like how you think about the world. And then the wealth gap would be like the quantitative driver of that. That some people have more money than others. Let's see what they have to say about this.
Yeah.
It's both, you know. Some population. Here we are at the World Government Summit in Dubai, and you have very globalization, and everybody, the elites, let's call them the elites, where they're among the elites, are here doing deals and you know, facing questions and all of that. And at the same time, then there's those who are dealing with their basics. So wealth gaps contribute to it, but there's also values gaps.
Technology is part of the reason that we're here.
Religion,
Yes.
you know, belief systems, these are important too.
Of course. But we're on the edge of this AI transformation, which seems like it's going to accelerate the trends that have led us to where we are right now. So what do you, I mean, if artificial intelligence, you know, increases efficiency but leaves an even greater number of people without meaningful work in the United States, what happens?
There needs to be a game plan.
Yeah.
Okay. There needs to be a game plan. That's the main thing. In other words, I can describe the circumstance.
Yes.
Okay. And we can agree that there needs to be a game plan.
What's going on here? Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Well, let me ask you, since
ahead.
Since
Like
you know
it.
everybody, spend your life talking to everybody, and you're one of the world's biggest investors, so you're taking these questions seriously.